Welcome to today's Garage Devotional. I'm Pastor Ted with Connect Church. Thank you for being here today. We are starting a new series in our Garage Devotionals called The Strange and Curious. So as we start this new series on the strange and curious, it will be a little different than what we have been doing in a couple ways. In this series, we're going to be looking at what might be called the curious or strange passages from the Bible. And these are ones that I'm going to ask you, are there passages in the Bible that you find curious or kind of strange? And so throughout this series, I want you to email me those passages so that we could talk about them. I'll get to as many as I can, and I'll share some of mine with you as I'll begin this series with one of mine. And my email address to send your submissions of strange and curious Bible passages, so to ted@connectchurchventura.com. So as we begin with strange things, and since this is a garage devotional, we're going to begin probably every week with a strange car. Many of them will be from the past, but a strange car. So let me start with the first strange car today. So hold on and let me get the lights right for this. And look at this first strange car. There it is, the first strange car we're going to look at. And as you think about that strange car, it is a 1935 Chrysler Stout Scarab. It was the first minivan ever made, and they only made 9 of them, just 9 of these. But it was the first minivan ever made. It seated 6 people. It had a card table in it, and the middle seat swiveled 180 degrees. For the time period, this was a sharp car, although I think it looks a little funny. So as we go on, we'll show you some more of those. But let's get into our passage today. We're going to be looking at the book of 2 Kings in the 5th chapter, the whole 5th chapter. I'm going to read part of it, but not all of it, so we kind of get an idea of the context. So let me begin reading some of it. Nahum, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in favor because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from Israel, and she worked in the service of Nahum's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure his leprosy." So Naaman went and told his Lord, or told the king, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." And so Nahum begins out, but he takes with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of very fine and expensive clothing. And so he goes and he brings the letter to the king of Israel and gives it to him. And the king of Israel is upset because he's saying, "How am I to cure leprosy? No one can do that." And he thinks that the king of Syria is trying to provoke a war. But Elijah the prophet heard what the king said and then sent to the king a message, say, "Send Nahum to me so that he might know there's a prophet in Israel. There's a prophet in Israel who's the prophet of the God." And so Naaman comes to Elijah, and he comes to his place that he's living, and Elijah doesn't come out. He sends his servant, and the servant tells Nahum, "Go down to the river Jordan and dip 7 times, and your leprosy will be gone." And then the servant goes back in. Naaman's furious. He says, "I thought he'd at least come out and talk with me, at least, have intercourse with me and tell me this and that and pray over me and this take place. But just to go down to the Jordan." And he was furious and he was ready to go home on his way there. But his servant said to him, "Is this such a great matter? What a great opportunity. Did he say that you would be cured of your leprosy if you just do this?" And Nahum was saying, "But there's all these greater rivers in Syria." But his servant said, "Why not do this," basically. And so he goes and he dips in the Jordan 7 times, and he is healed completely, whole. And as we see, he goes back to Elijah's place, and Elijah comes out now and meets him. And he says, "Here, I'll give you this gold and this silver and these fine clothes for this healing." And Elijah said, "No, I'm not going to take any of it. It's not. It's the gift of the Lord. I'm not going to take anything for this. And so he said, well, then I have a favor to ask from you, Elijah. Can I fill big, huge bags of dirt, as much as 2 donkeys could carry, and take them back to Syria? And that's curious. Why would he do that? Why would he ask for those? We're going to talk about that here in a few minutes, but it was the purpose of being on the soil of Israel, who serves the true God. And so, because Naaman became a follower of God that day. So let's look at some thoughts on this. This is a curious passage to me. This story is all about who is the real God of all things. It's a story of that, of the real God of all things. The gods of Syria and the gods of Israel and all the other ones, that who is the real God? And by this incredible healing and miracle, Naaman comes to understand there's only one true God. And he goes back and he says he's only going to worship the one true God forever and ever, because there's only one God, he says, in all of the world. It's about discerning who is the real God from the fakes. Second, it's about humility. Naaman was full of pride in his accomplishments, his positions, and the God of Syria. But when confronted with Elijah not even coming out to him, this is an aspect of humility. He needs to humble himself. And the scriptures tell us we're to humble ourselves before the Lord, and he will lift us up. So Naaman was learning to be humble. Even all of his accomplishments, all the things he's done, that he's learning that he needs to be humble, because there's only one true great God. Next, it's about trust. Naaman needed to trust the words of Elijah and the true God and act on them. That was a challenge. He thought they were foolish. And it comes down to, do you trust the prophet? Do you trust God? Do I trust God with all my heart and all my being? Sometimes that's hard. Naaman struggled with it, but through the help of his servants, he broke through, and he's on a trust in what the prophet says, putting his trust in God. It's also about identity. First, Naaman now identified as a follower of Jehovah. He has a new identity now. He's a follower of Jesus. He's a follower of Jehovah, or God. And the dirt was a way to acknowledge that God, the God of Israel, was the only true God. And on the dirt that he brought back, it made acknowledgement that he would help him identify to God as he felt like he is on the soil of the earthly kingdom of God, and that he'd worship on that soil, even though he is in Syria. Think about it. It helped him identify with God. It helped him identify with the true believers in God, the true followers of God. While he was in this nation that worshiped false gods, it helped him identify. It gave him identity as a follower of the true God. Lastly, it exposes a corrupt or selfish heart. In this story, it exposes a corrupt heart, in a heart that is jealous. It exposes this, and it's Elijah's servant's heart. He was focused on the things of this world that he believed would bring him comfort and position. So he wanted those things for comfort and position to make him feel that he is significant. But he was significant if he was a follower of Jesus, a follower of God. And he had strayed away. He's a servant of this great prophet, but he strayed away. And his judgment was given to him that he would now have Naaman's leprosy and all his descendants. But even in that judgment that the prophet pronounced, there was hope to change the servant's heart back to the true God during that period. This passage asks us the question, are we following the true God? It gives us a challenge to truly, fully trust Jesus. As well, it shows us where our true identity is to come from, Jesus and Jesus only. Lastly, we are encouraged to do a heart checkup periodically to make sure we have not allowed selfishness, greed, and comfort to fill our hearts and push us away from Jesus and away from others, that we are to be humble servants of Jesus Christ. Well, that's the first one of this series. Please do send me your submissions at ted@connectchurchventura.com. I'd love to just share with you those passages and walk through with you with those. So we'll see you next week, and we'll have another card for you next week.